The first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh concrete at 6:47 in the morning. It was a Tuesday, and the sound that woke me wasn't my alarm. It was the low, grinding rumble of an auger truck boring into the earth 32 feet from my bedroom window. I pulled on jeans and walked outside barefoot, the dew from the St. Augustine grass soaking the cuffs, and I stopped at the edge of my frontage, where the county right-of-way meets my surveyed parcel line. There, in the pale gray light, 4 men in orange safety vests were pouring a concrete pad. Next to them, lying on its side like a beached metal whale, was a 4-unit cluster mailbox kiosk. It was the kind the Postal Service uses for new subdivisions, all galvanized steel and numbered doors, and it was sitting squarely on my private frontage. Not the easement, not the common area, my land. I didn't yell. I didn't run toward them waving my arms. I stood there for 11 seconds, let the cold concrete smell fill my lungs, and then I walked back inside, picked up my phone, and took a photograph through the kitchen window. The timestamp read 6:52 a.m. That photograph became the first page in a folder that, 6 weeks later, would force the HOA to pay $14,700 in removal and restoration costs, trigger a formal Postal Service investigation, and end with Karen Whitmore standing in front of 31 residents, her face the color of old milk, as a postal supervisor read aloud from a file that proved she had forged the site authorization. She had no idea, standing there in her pressed linen blouse the day she first knocked on my door, that the document in my truck had already ended her entire claim. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. The property matters to me in a way that's hard to explain to people who see land as just a line on a tax map. My grandfather bought this half-acre frontage in 1962, back when this area was still unincorporated county land with dirt roads and cattle guards. He was a stonemason, a quiet man with hands like sandpaper, and he built the low limestone wall that still runs along the frontage line. Every stone came from the creek bed at the back of the property. He set them himself over 2 summers, mixing mortar in a wheelbarrow while my grandmother handed him cold glasses of sweet tea. When he died in 2004, the wall was still standing, and the deed passed to my mother, and when she passed in 2019, it came to me. I'm 43 years old, a civil engineer by trade, and I've spent the last 4 years restoring the old house and maintaining that wall. I know every inch of this land. I know where the survey pins are, because I drove them myself with a sledgehammer when I had the property resurveyed in 2020, after a boundary dispute with the neighbor to the north. That survey, stamped and recorded at the county clerk's office, showed my frontage extending 47 feet from the center line of the county road. The HOA's common area ended at the property line of the subdivision entrance, a full 62 feet to the east. There was no overlap. There was no easement. There was no shared access agreement. There was just my grandfather's wall, my frontage, and now, at 6:52 on a Tuesday morning, a concrete pad curing in the shape of a postal kiosk footprint. The HOA in question was the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a sprawling subdivision of 187 homes that had been developed in 3 phases between 1998 and 2012. I didn't live in Willow Creek. My property predated the subdivision by 36 years, and when the developer had tried to buy my grandfather's land in 1999 to extend the Phase 2 plat, my grandfather had refused. The developer had built around us, and the result was that my half-acre sat like a small island of older county land right at the main entrance to the subdivision. Every resident of Willow Creek drove past my frontage to get home. They saw my grandfather's wall. They saw my mailbox, a simple black metal box on a cedar post that had been there since 1978. And now, apparently, they were going to see a 4-unit cluster kiosk that the HOA had decided to install without my permission. I made coffee and waited. At 8:14 a.m., a white Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb, and Karen Whitmore stepped out. I'd seen her before at county meetings and at the annual neighborhood cleanup events that she organized, with the kind of performative enthusiasm that made people either admire her or avoid her. She was the HOA board president, a position she'd held for 6 years, and she carried herself like a woman who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. She was 58, with blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, and she wore a pressed linen blouse and white capri pants that morning, an outfit entirely unsuited for a construction site. She held a clipboard and walked toward the workers with the confident stride of someone inspecting her own kingdom. I watched her point at the kiosk, nod approvingly, and then turn toward my house. I was already standing on the porch, coffee in hand. "Good morning," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that HOA presidents use when they're about to explain something you're supposed to already know. "I'm glad you're up. We wanted to let you know about the community modernization project." I took a sip of coffee. "The what?" "The mail kiosk." She gestured toward the concrete pad like she was unveiling a statue. "The board voted last month to upgrade our mail delivery system. The Postal Service has been encouraging cluster box units for efficiency, and this location was identified as the optimal site for Phase 1. It's going to serve the first 40 homes on Magnolia and Oakcrest." I looked at the kiosk, then back at her. "That's my frontage." She smiled the kind of smile that's meant to end a conversation before it starts. "It's within the HOA's common area designation for postal access purposes. The board reviewed the plat maps. Everything's been approved. Show me the recorded easement." Her smile tightened by about 2 millimeters. "I don't have it with me, but the board's attorney reviewed everything. This is a community benefit. The Postal Service has already signed off on the site." I didn't answer right away. I took another sip of coffee, let the silence stretch, and watched one of the workers trowel the surface of the concrete. The sun was fully up now, and the heat was starting to build. I could smell the diesel from the auger truck and the faint sweetness of the crepe myrtles along the fence line. "I'm going to need you to stop the work," I said. Karen's smile disappeared entirely. "That's not going to happen. The concrete is already poured. The kiosk will be installed this afternoon. If you have concerns, you can bring them to the next board meeting on the 15th. "I'm not asking for a meeting. I'm telling you that you're pouring concrete on private property without permission." She looked at me like I was a child who didn't understand how the adult world worked. "This isn't private property. This is community frontage. The HOA has maintained this strip for years. The landscaping, the mowing, the sprinkler system, all HOA. You've benefited from that maintenance, without contributing a dime in HOA dues. The least you can do is cooperate with a project that benefits the entire neighborhood." That was the moment I realized she had no idea what she was talking about. The HOA had never maintained my frontage. I had maintained it. I had the receipts from the landscaping company I'd hired every spring for the past 4 years. I had the irrigation repair invoices. I had the property tax records showing I paid taxes on that exact parcel. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded slowly, finished my coffee, and said, "Put that in writing." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "The claim that this is HOA common area. The claim that the board reviewed the plat maps. The claim that the Postal Service approved the site. Put it all in writing and send it to me. Certified mail." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out if I was bluffing or if I actually had something. People like Karen always assume silence is weakness. They mistake patience for fear. She didn't know that I'd spent the last 20 years of my career reviewing site plans, checking parcel boundaries, and reading the fine print on construction authorizations. She didn't know that the survey map in my truck had been recorded at the county 3 years earlier, and that the parcel number on my deed didn't match any of the HOA's common area designations. She didn't know any of that, and she didn't ask. "I'll have the board secretary send you the project summary," she said finally, her voice cooler now. "But the installation is proceeding as scheduled. If you interfere with the workers, I'll have to call the sheriff." "I'm not going to interfere with the workers," I said. "I'm going to let them finish their job, and then I'm going to let the Postal Service explain to you why their job was done on the wrong property." She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "The Postal Service already approved the site. You're welcome to call them if you want to waste your time." I didn't answer. I just walked back inside, set my coffee cup in the sink, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was pull up the county GIS parcel viewer and take a screenshot of my property boundaries, overlaid with the HOA's common area plat. The second thing I did was call the county surveyor's office and request a certified copy of my recorded survey. The third thing I did was call the Postal Service. It took me 47 minutes to reach someone who could actually help me. The local post office referred me to the District Growth Management Office, which referred me to the Delivery Operations Supervisor for our region. His name was Marcus Chen, and when I finally got him on the phone at 11:23 a.m., I explained the situation in the kind of calm, precise language that engineers use when they're documenting a problem. There's a cluster box kiosk being installed on my private frontage, I said. The HOA president claims the Postal Service approved the site. I'm calling to verify that approval and to inform you that the site is not HOA common area. It's private property, parcel number 14-7B-092, recorded in my name. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the click of a keyboard. Mr. Callahan, I'm looking at the site authorization request for Willow Creek Estates, Phase 1 cluster box installation. The request was submitted by a Karen Whitmore on behalf of the HOA board. The site map attached to the request shows the kiosk location on a parcel identified as HOA common area, parcel number 14-7B-088. That's not my parcel, I said. Parcel 14-7B-088 is the HOA's entrance landscaping strip, 62 feet east of my frontage. My parcel is 14-7B-092. The kiosk is being installed on my land. Another pause. More keyboard clicks. Mr. Callahan, can you send me your recorded survey and a copy of your deed? I need to verify this before I can take any action. I'll have them to you within the hour. I hung up, scanned my deed and survey into a single PDF, and emailed it to Marcus Chen with a brief cover note that included the exact GPS coordinates of the concrete pad and the photographs I'd taken that morning. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Diane Okonkwo, who specialized in property disputes and had helped me with the boundary issue in 2020. She listened to my summary without interrupting, and when I finished, she said exactly what I expected her to say. Don't touch the kiosk. Don't block access to it. Don't confront the HOA president again. Document everything. Let the Postal Service handle the site authorization issue. If the HOA tries to fine you or place a lien, we'll file a quiet title action and a trespass claim. But right now, the postal file is your best leverage. If they installed on the wrong parcel, the Postal Service will require relocation, and the HOA will be on the hook for all costs. That's what I figured, I said. One more thing. If Karen Whitmore sends you anything in writing claiming the site is HOA property, save it. Every false claim she makes in writing is evidence. She didn't need to tell me that. I'd already started a folder. By noon, it contained the morning photographs, the GIS screenshots, the email to Marcus Chen, and a printed copy of my recorded survey with the kiosk location marked in red ink. By 2 p.m., it also contained a certified mail receipt for a letter I'd sent to the HOA board, formally notifying them of the trespass and requesting immediate removal of the kiosk. I didn't expect them to comply. I expected them to double down. People like Karen always double down. A small group of residents had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the noise and the novelty of the new installation. I watched from my porch as Karen gestured at the kiosk, her voice carrying across the frontage. This is phase 1 of our modernization project, she was saying. Starting next week, mail for the first 40 homes on Magnolia and Oakcrest will be delivered here instead of to individual boxes. It's more secure, more efficient, and it's going to improve the look of the neighborhood. A woman in a yellow sundress raised her hand like she was in a classroom. Where are we supposed to park? There's no pull-off area. The Postal Service will handle delivery from the road, Karen said smoothly. You'll receive new keys for your assigned locker in the next few days. A man in a golf shirt frowned. I didn't get a notice about this. When was the vote? The board voted last month. The meeting minutes are available on the HOA website. The man didn't look satisfied, but he didn't push. That was how Karen operated. She presented decisions as fait accompli, and most residents were too busy or too intimidated to question her. I'd seen it before in HOA disputes. The board president creates a sense of inevitability, and people go along because fighting feels like too much work. I didn't go along. I stayed on my porch, watched the crowd disperse, and waited. At 6:12 p.m., my phone rang. It was Marcus Chen. Mr. Callahan, I've reviewed the documents you sent. The survey and deed confirm that the kiosk was installed on parcel 14-7B-092, which is your private property. The site authorization request, submitted by Ms. Whitmore, listed parcel 14-7B-088, which is HOA common area. The site map attached to the request appears to have been altered to show the kiosk location on the common area parcel, but the actual installation coordinates don't match the approved site. I let out a slow breath. So the authorization was based on a false site map. That's correct. The Postal Service cannot maintain a delivery point on private property without a recorded easement or a valid lease agreement. Neither exists for this site. I'm going to recommend that the kiosk be relocated to the approved parcel or to an alternate site that meets postal regulations. The HOA will be responsible for all relocation costs, and there may be additional administrative penalties for submitting a false site authorization. What happens next? I'm going to contact Ms. Whitmore and the HOA board tomorrow morning to inform them of the discrepancy. I'd also like to schedule a site visit to document the installation and verify the parcel boundaries in person. Can you be available Thursday morning? I'll be here. I hung up and added Marcus Chen's name and phone number to my folder. Then I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down behind the kiosk, a 4-unit steel monument to Karen Whitmore's arrogance. The concrete was still curing, the metal was still shiny, and somewhere in a Postal Service office 23 miles away, a file was growing thicker with every false claim Karen had made. The next morning, the fallout began. At 8:03 a.m., a woman I'd never met knocked on my door. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a toddler balanced on her hip. She looked exhausted and angry. "Are you the one who's trying to get the mail kiosk removed?" she demanded before I could even say hello. "I'm the property owner where the kiosk was installed without permission," I said. "Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is? I've got 2 kids under 4. I can't drive to the post office every time I need to check my mail. Karen said the kiosk was approved and ready to go, and now I'm hearing that you're blocking it because of some property line technicality." I leaned against the doorframe. "What's your name?" "Jessica. Jessica Morrow. I live on Magnolia." "Jessica, the kiosk was installed on my private land, not HOA common area, my land. The Postal Service confirmed this morning that the site authorization was based on a false map. I'm not blocking anything. The HOA made a mistake, and now they have to fix it." She shifted the toddler to her other hip. "Karen said you were just being difficult. She said the board had every right to put the kiosk there. Karen is wrong, and if you want to know why, you should ask to see the site map she submitted to the Postal Service. Ask her why the map shows the kiosk on parcel 14-7B-088 when it's actually sitting on parcel 14-7B-092. Jessica stared at me for a long moment. The toddler started to fuss, and she bounced him absently. "I didn't know about the parcel numbers," she said finally. "Most people don't. That's how Karen operates. She counts on people not checking." She didn't apologize, but her anger seemed to deflate. She shifted the toddler again and said, "I just want my mail. You'll get your mail, but it's going to come from a kiosk that's installed in the right place, not on my grandfather's land." She left without another word, and I added her name to my folder. Jessica Morrow, Magnolia resident, misinformed by Karen Whitmore. The folder was getting thicker. At 10:47 a.m., the kiosk installer returned. His name was Dale Riggins, and he was the owner of a small contracting company that specialized in Postal Service installations. He was a big man in his 50s, with sunburned arms and a wary expression, and he knocked on my door with the hesitant air of someone who'd already heard there was a problem. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Dale Riggins. I installed the kiosk yesterday. I know who you are. I got a call from the postal supervisor this morning, Marcus Chen. He told me the site was on the wrong parcel." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been doing postal installations for 12 years. I've never had a site authorization come back invalid. Karen Whitmore gave me the approved site map with the postal stamp on it. I didn't know the parcel was wrong." "I believe you," I said, "but you poured concrete on my land without my permission." "That's a problem." He nodded slowly. "I understand. Look, I'm not here to make excuses. I just want to know what's going to happen. Chen said the Postal Service might require relocation. If that happens, I'm going to have to pull the kiosk and re-pour the pad at the correct site. That's going to cost money, and I need to know who's paying for it." "That's between you and the HOA," I said. "But if you need documentation for your insurance or for a claim against the board, I can provide the survey and the Postal Service's confirmation that the site was invalid." He looked at me for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. "You've got all that already?" "I've got a folder." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Karen told me you were some kind of troublemaker. Said you'd probably try to sue me personally." "I'm not interested in suing you. You were given bad information. The The person who gave you that information is the one who should be worried. Dale nodded again, and I could see the relief in his shoulders. I appreciate that. I really do. I've got a crew to pay and a reputation to protect. If the Postal Service blacklists me over a bad site authorization, I'm done. Then you should make sure the Postal Service knows exactly who gave you that authorization and exactly what map you were told to use. He left a few minutes later, and I added his name to the folder. Dale Riggins, contractor, misled by Karen Whitmore. The folder was becoming a roster of people Karen had lied to. The third knock came at 2:15 p.m. This time it was a man in his 60s with a trimmed gray beard and a Willow Creek Estates polo shirt. He introduced himself as Bill Hartley, the HOA board secretary. "Mr. Callahan, I'm here on behalf of the board," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We received your certified letter this morning, and there's been some discussion about the kiosk situation. Is Karen with you?" "No, she's dealing with some calls from the Postal Service. I wanted to talk to you directly, without the board politics." I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table. He looked uncomfortable, the way people look when they're about to admit something they'd rather not say out loud. "I've been the board secretary for 4 years," he began. "I take the minutes. I file the paperwork. I handle the administrative stuff. When Karen proposed the mail kiosk project back in March, I thought it was a good idea. The Postal Service has been pushing for cluster boxes, and the old individual boxes on Magnolia and Oakcrest were getting vandalized. It made sense. What didn't make sense? The site selection." He rubbed his jaw. "Karen presented a site map at the board meeting showing the kiosk location on the HOA's entrance strip, parcel 14-7B-088. The board voted based on that map. But when I pulled the county records this morning after getting your letter, I realized the map Karen showed us didn't match the recorded plat. The recorded plat shows the HOA common area ending 62 feet east of your property line. The map Karen showed us had the common area extending all the way to your grandfather's wall." She altered the map. I don't know if she altered it or if she just used an old developer brochure that was never accurate. But either way, the board voted on bad information. And now the Postal Service is saying the site authorization is invalid and the kiosk has to be moved. I leaned back in my chair. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think the board needs to know the truth before this gets worse. Karen is telling everyone that you're just being difficult, that the kiosk is technically on HOA property, and that the Postal Service will sort it out in our favor. But I've seen the county records now, I've seen your survey, and I've seen the email from Marcus Chen. Karen is wrong, and if the board doesn't correct this, we're all going to be liable. What do you want from me? I want to know what you're planning to do. Are you going to sue the HOA?" "I'm not planning to sue anyone," I said. "I'm planning to let the Postal Service do its job. If the kiosk is relocated and my property is restored, I'll consider the matter resolved. But if Karen keeps lying and the board keeps backing her, then yes, I'll file a trespass claim and a quiet title action. And I'll name every board member who voted based on that false map." Bill's face went pale. "I voted for it. We all did. We didn't know the map was wrong." "Then you should make sure the record reflects that. Put a statement in the board minutes acknowledging the error. Demand that Karen produce the original site authorization documents. And stop letting her speak for the board until this is resolved." He nodded slowly. "I can do that. I can call an emergency board meeting. Do it soon. The postal supervisor is coming Thursday morning to document the site. You'll want the board's position to be clear before he arrives." Bill left a few minutes later, and I added his name to the folder. Bill Hartley, board secretary, now aware of the false map. The folder was becoming a timeline of Karen's unraveling. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy, humid heat that made the air feel like soup. I was on the porch by 7:30 a.m., a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, and the folder on the table beside me. The kiosk sat on my frontage like a monument to bureaucratic arrogance, its metal doors gleaming in the early light. At 8:12 a.m., a white Postal Service van pulled up to the curb, and Marcus Chen stepped out. He was a lean man in his 40s, with glasses and a quiet, methodical manner. He carried a tablet and a thick file folder. "Mr. Callahan," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for being available." "Thanks for coming." He walked to the kiosk and began taking photographs with his tablet. He measured the distance from the kiosk to the county road, checked the GPS coordinates, and compared them to the site map in his file. While he worked, a small crowd began to gather. Jessica Morrow was there, the toddler on her hip again. Dale Riggins stood by his truck, arms crossed. Bill Hartley arrived with 2 other board members, a woman named Patricia Vance and a man named Roger Kim. And at 8:31 a.m., Karen Whitmore's white Lexus pulled up to the curb. She stepped out looking less polished than usual. Her blouse was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She walked toward Marcus Chen with a clipboard of her own, her voice pitched loud enough for the gathered residents to hear. "Mr. Chen, I'm glad you're here. There's been a misunderstanding about the site location, but I have the original board approval documents and the site map that was submitted with the authorization request. I'm confident we can clear this up." Marcus looked up from his tablet. "Miss Whitmore, I've already reviewed the documents you submitted. The site map you provided shows the kiosk on parcel 14-7B-088, which is HOA common area. However, the actual installation is on parcel 14-7B-092, which is private property owned by Mr. Callahan. The GPS coordinates confirm this. The county survey confirms this. The deed confirms this. The site authorization you submitted is invalid." Karen's smile flickered. "There must be a mistake in the county records. The HOA has maintained this strip for years. Everyone in the neighborhood knows this is community frontage." "The county records are not mistaken," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "I've verified them with the county surveyor's office this morning. Parcel 14-7B-092 has been in Mr. Callahan's family since 1962. There is no recorded easement, no lease agreement, and no HOA common area designation on this parcel. The Postal Service cannot maintain a delivery point on private property without proper authorization. The kiosk will need to be relocated to the approved site or to an alternate site that meets postal regulations." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jessica Morrow shifted the toddler on her hip and said, "So Karen lied to us?" Karen turned toward her, her voice sharp. "I did not lie. The board voted on the site based on the information we had. If there's a discrepancy in the maps, that's a county issue, not an HOA issue." "The discrepancy is in the map you submitted," Marcus said, holding up the file. "This map shows the kiosk on parcel 14-7B-088. But the actual coordinates of the installation don't match this map. Someone altered the site plan before it was submitted to the Postal Service." The murmur grew louder. Dale Riggins stepped forward, his face red. "Karen, you gave me that map. You told me it was the approved site. I poured concrete based on your authorization. If the Postal Service blacklists me over this, I'm going to lose my business." "I gave you the map the board approved," Karen said, but her voice was losing its confidence. "If there's a problem with the map, it's not my fault." "Actually," Bill Hartley said, stepping forward with a folder of his own, "I pulled the board minutes from the March meeting. The map you presented to the board showed the kiosk on the HOA entrance strip, parcel 14-7B-088. But the map you submitted to the Postal Service is different. It shows the kiosk on a parcel labeled as HOA common area, but the boundaries on that map don't match the recorded plat. I think you used an old developer brochure that was never recorded." Karen's face went pale. "That's ridiculous. I used the official HOA plat map." "Then why doesn't it match the county records?" Bill asked. The question hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower and the toddler's quiet babbling. Karen looked around at the gathered residents, at the board members, at Marcus Chen, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. She had been caught, not by me, by her own paperwork. Marcus closed his file. "Ms. Whitmore, the Postal Service will be issuing a formal notice of invalid site authorization. The kiosk must be relocated within 30 days. The HOA will be responsible for all removal and relocation costs, as well as any restoration costs for Mr. Callahan's property. Additionally, submitting a false site authorization is a violation of postal regulations, and there may be administrative penalties. I'll be sending the full report to the district office this afternoon." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in her expression. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize the system you thought you controlled has turned against you. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just picked up my folder and said, I'll have my surveyor out here this afternoon to assess the damage to the frontage. The HOA will receive an invoice for restoration costs. Karen's voice came out as a whisper. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's not over until the kiosk is gone and my grandfather's wall is repaired. But the postal file has already returned your claim. There's nothing left to argue. The crowd began to disperse. Jessica Morrow walked past Karen without a word, her expression a mixture of anger and disappointment. Dale Riggins climbed into his truck and drove away, his phone already pressed to his ear. Bill Hartley and the other board members huddled together, speaking in low, urgent tones. And Karen Whitmore stood alone next to the kiosk, her clipboard hanging uselessly at her side, her empire of false authority crumbling around her. I went back inside and made another cup of coffee. The folder on my kitchen table was thick now, stuffed with photographs, emails, certified letters, survey maps, and the Postal Service's formal confirmation of the invalid site authorization. It had taken 6 days from the morning I smelled fresh concrete to the morning Marcus Chen stood on my frontage and read the truth aloud. 6 days of patience, documentation, and silence. 6 days of letting Karen Whitmore dig her own grave. But the story wasn't over. There was a late story surprise coming, one that even I didn't see until the following week. It arrived in the form of a phone call from Diane Okonkwo on Monday afternoon. I've been doing some additional research on the HOA's finances, she said, and I found something interesting. The mail kiosk project wasn't just about convenience. Karen Whitmore had applied for a community improvement grant from the county to fund the installation. The grant application listed the kiosk as a neighborhood safety and modernization initiative and requested $22,000 in county funds. The application included the same false site map she submitted to the Postal Service. I sat down at the kitchen table. She was trying to get county money for a project on my land? It gets worse. The grant was approved in April. The county disbursed $18,000 to the HOA's project account. Karen signed the acceptance letter. If the county finds out the project was built on private property without authorization, they're going to demand repayment. And Karen could be facing fraud charges for submitting a false grant application. I let out a slow breath. How did you find this? I called the County Community Development Office to ask if there were any permits associated with the kiosk installation. They didn't have permits, but they had the grant file. The clerk was very interested to hear that the project site was invalid. She said she'd be forwarding the file to the county attorney's office. I hung up and added the grant information to my folder. Karen Whitmore hadn't just lied to the Postal Service and the HOA board. She'd lied to the county. She'd taken public money for a project she had no right to build. And now the county was going to come looking for answers. The next board meeting was on the 15th, and I decided to attend. I didn't plan to speak. I just wanted to watch. The meeting was held in the Willow Creek Clubhouse, a large room with folding chairs and a podium at the front. By 7 p.m., the room was packed. I counted at least 60 residents. More than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. Jessica Morrow was there, sitting near the back with her husband. Dale Riggins was standing against the wall, arms crossed. Bill Hartley sat at the board table, looking grim. And Karen Whitmore sat at the center of the table, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The meeting began with routine business, minutes approval, treasurer's report, committee updates. But the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the kiosk discussion. It came at 7:42 p.m., when Bill Hartley cleared his throat and said, "The next item on the agenda is the mail kiosk project. I'd like to make a statement on behalf of the board." He stood up and faced the residents. As many of you know, the Postal Service has determined that the kiosk installed on Magnolia Frontage was placed on private property without valid authorization. The site map submitted to the Postal Service was inaccurate, and the board was not aware of the discrepancy when we voted to approve the project. We are working with the Postal Service to relocate the kiosk to the correct site, and we are in discussions with Mr. Callahan regarding restoration of his property. A man in the front row raised his hand. Who submitted the false map? Bill hesitated. The site authorization was submitted by the board president. Every head in the room turned toward Karen. She didn't look up. Her hands were shaking. I have more to report, Bill continued. The board has also learned that the kiosk project was partially funded by a county community improvement grant. The grant application included the same inaccurate site map. The county has been notified of the discrepancy, and they may require repayment of the grant funds. The board is conducting an internal review of all project documentation, and we will be retaining an independent auditor to examine the HOA's finances. The room erupted. Residents started shouting questions, demanding answers, calling for Karen's resignation. Karen sat frozen at the table, her face the color of old milk. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't try to explain. She just sat there, her clipboard untouched in front of her, while the community she had ruled for 6 years turned against her. I stayed for the rest of the meeting, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The folder in my lap had already done all the talking. By the end of the night, the board had voted to accept Karen's resignation, effective immediately. Bill Hartley was appointed interim president, and a motion was passed to hire an independent contractor to relocate the kiosk and restore my frontage at the HOA's expense. The relocation took 3 weeks. Dale Riggins handled the work himself, carefully removing the kiosk from my frontage and reinstalling it on the HOA's entrance strip, 62 feet to the east. He repaired the damage to my grandfather's wall, replacing 3 stones that had been cracked during the original installation. He reseeded the grass and removed every trace of the concrete pad. When he was finished, the frontage looked exactly as it had before Karen Whitmore's project had begun. The county grant office sent a formal demand letter to the HOA, requiring repayment of the $18,000 in disbursed funds. The HOA's insurance covered part of the cost, but the rest came out of the association's reserves. Special assessments were discussed, but never implemented. The board decided to absorb the loss and tighten the budget for the next fiscal year. Karen Whitmore moved out of Willow Creek Estates 6 months later. I heard from Bill Hartley that she'd gone to live with her daughter in another state. The county attorney's office investigated the grant fraud but ultimately declined to press charges, citing insufficient evidence of criminal intent. Karen claimed she'd made an honest mistake with the maps, and the county decided it wasn't worth the legal battle. But her reputation was destroyed. She would never serve on another board, never lead another community project, never wield the kind of power she'd once held over Willow Creek. As for me, I still live in my grandfather's house. I still drink coffee on the porch in the mornings. I still maintain the limestone wall, checking the mortar after every heavy rain. The folder from the kiosk dispute sits in a fireproof box in my closet, a record of everything that happened. I don't look at it often, but I like knowing it's there. It reminds me that patience is not weakness. Silence is not fear, and sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else's lies collapse under their own weight. The mail kiosk on the HOA entrance strip is still there, serving the residents of Magnolia and Oakcrest. It's a perfectly functional piece of postal infrastructure, installed in the right place, on the right parcel, with the right authorization. Every time I drive past it, I think about the morning I woke up to the smell of fresh concrete. I think about Karen Whitmore's confident smile and her dismissive laugh. And I think about the moment Marcus Chen opened his file and read the truth aloud, while 31 residents watched and Karen's empire crumbled. She thought she was modernizing the community. She was actually creating evidence. And the postal file returned her claim, 1 page at a time. This morning, I walked out to the frontage and stood by my grandfather's wall. The sun was just coming up, and the light was soft on the stones. The grass had grown back thick and green where the concrete pad used to be. You'd never know anything had happened there, but I know, and the folder knows. And somewhere in a Postal Service archive, a file still holds the map that Karen Whitmore altered, the authorization that was never valid, and the record of a woman who mistook arrogance for authority and lost everything. I finished my coffee and went back inside. The folder stayed in the fireproof box, the wall stayed standing, and the morning stayed quiet, the way it was supposed to be.